Hello, today is January 16th, 2019, and I'm here to interview Nicole Harris for the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program. My name is Grace Chun, and this is
Marilyn Youngquist.
And I already said your name, but do you mind repeating your name, please?
Sure, my name is Nicole Harris.
And when and where were you born?
I was born in Portland, Jamaica.
Okay, can you tell us a little bit about growing up?
Yeah, so I was born in Portland, Jamaica, and I came to the United States when I was a baby, but my household was still very much Jamaican. I was raised in Miami, Florida, and there was a huge Caribbean influence, Hispanic influence, Jewish influence, Asian influence. I grew up in North Miami Beach that had all of these enclaves. So at any given moment, I could see Orthodox Jews walking to temple. Or during the holidays, there was a menorah truck that lit up and had a menorah on it. We also had there was a Chinese festival. We had a lot of Chinese restaurants. We had Korean places. There was a Korean church, not too far from me. And then a huge Caribbean influence. A lot of people were Haitian. So a lot of my friends growing up, majority of them spoke Creole. And then, of course, Miami. So there was a huge Hispanic population. So there were people from everywhere. So I thought it was super normal to grow up with people of all races, all cultures.
Is that where you mostly grew up?
Yes, that's where I mostly grew up.
Okay. Do you have any other memories of childhood that you'd like to share?
For sure. So one of the interesting things about my actual household was that my family, we were raised in the church, raised Christian. But my grandmother, when she came to the United States, she became a Buddhist. So in my household, I actually, my mom were Christian, we were going to church, but then there was a certain time where we were smelling the incense, you're hearing the chants, and no mirenge, and we had the Buddha statues in the house. So that was really, really interesting because very, very early on, my ideas of faith were knowing what I knew to be the truth in Jesus as a Christian, but having someone that I love so dear to me who practiced another faith. So me and my grandmother had a lot of conversations, and I think towards the end of her life, she found her way back. But for the majority of my life, those were the influences I had at home. And then in Jamaica, I'm a part of, I guess you'd call it a tribe. I'm a Maroon. And the Maroons were the people that traveled up to the mountains. So during slavery, they endured slavery, but they were able to find their own sort of freedom by hiding out in the mountains. And I'm directly descended by from a woman named Granny Nanny. And she actually went toe to toe with the British. So to this day, in Jamaica, the Maroons, I don't think they pay taxes or much taxes on their land. They're able to build as they will. So they've retained a lot of the Africanism. So some of the words that we say, all of those things it's really grounded in those Africanisms, the Caribbean influence, and then my upbringing in Miami.
Wow, thanks for sharing. Can you tell us a little bit more about your family? Did you also... So you lived closely with your grandmother?
Yes. I think that's something that you find a lot in ethnic families, across the board, whether you're Black, you're Hispanic, you're Asian, it doesn't matter at all. That intergenerational living arrangement is something that's super, super common. So I was doing that, but so was my Haitian friend, so was Ziao, my Chinese friend. Everyone was living intergenerationally. And you do that for a lot of reasons. There's just a cultural reverence for the elderly. It's economic, especially when you come to the States. So that was just something that I just knew. I just knew growing up, and so my friends were doing it as well. So I grew up. In the house was my mom. It was my uncle, my cousin. They came later. My cousin came from Jamaica. Not Jamaica, sorry. He was living in Antigua because he's Jamaican father, which is my uncle, and his mom is Antiguan. So he came to the States later. But first it was just me, my mom, and my grandmother in the household. Yeah, so growing up, we always, I do remember that frequently, though, family members from Jamaica would travel and come there. So even though I was born there and I came here super young, I identify, I believe, more as a Jamaican person, a Caribbean person, more than an American. When people ask me who I am, I don't think I've ever said American. I don't think I've ever said American. I say Jamaican. I don't even hyphenate it. I'm Jamaican. And it's such an interesting duality to live between because to American people, they totally get it. You weren't born here. I hear the way your mom talks. She has an accent. This is food you're used to. All of these things. They totally get it. Like I don't fully identify. But when I go to Jamaica, I'm the American cousin. What do you mean you're Jamaican? You didn't grow up here. And I remember explaining it to one of my cousins, and he is an educated man. He's an engineer. His wife is super educated, but they couldn't wrap their heads around. I was like, do you know in America, like where you're born is typically where you identify from? And they were like, really? And these are people that are highly intelligent and well-traveled, but it's just not a concept. Like if you were not in the country having experiences on this land, how can you call yourself Jamaican? So sometimes it's just a hard line to toe. Sometimes it's hurtful too, because it's like, I'm so Jamaican. I love it all. Like, this is my culture. So that's kind of the line that I toe living in America as a Caribbean woman.
Thank you for sharing. And it's very interesting. I've never heard someone articulate it that well. So when you were growing up, living in a space where there's so many other groups of people and so much diversity, when did you first, and you thought that was normal, so when was kind of like your first encounter that, oh, this is maybe not the norm in other communities?
Right. I feel like it happened in segments. So it might have happened once in like elementary school, and then I kind of brushed it off because we went back to my normal. And then maybe something else happened in middle school. And then I was like, so that kind of happened in steps. I would say in elementary school, so one of the, not lies, that's too dramatic, but one of the beliefs of, I think a lot of immigrants, but definitely my family was private school is the best. Like you come to the States, they need to be in private school. So I was enrolled in, I think, a Catholic school down south. And during mass, this boy spit in my face, and it was a white kid. And but I remember, even though there weren't any slurs, and I was so young, too young to comprehend it, I remember knowing, and no one had put that rhetoric in my head. I hadn't seen anything on TV. I just had a deep knowing why it occurred, if that made sense. It was like, I don't think like this was just, hey, spit in that girl's face day. Like I was just like, I think there's a reason behind this. Another incident, there was a boy in my elementary school. My neighborhood that I grew up in was changing very rapidly. My neighborhood at first was, there was a lot of white people there, but then it was changing. We had a lot of Haitian immigrants come. We moved in, and we had a good relationship, but very quickly there was white flight. So a lot of white people left, or they were older, so they died, and the neighborhood was replaced. I mean, it was completely like just mostly Haitians. And I remember there was a boy, he was one of the last white people at my elementary school, and his dad was like a trucker and everything, and we loved him. We played with him all the time. And he said to us, oh, my dad says not to play with the blacks, but I don't care. I'm going to play with you guys anyway. And at the time, we just laughed it off. We thought it was hilarious. And then you go back and you look at those experiences, you're like, sheesh, and he didn't stay. Like, he didn't stay in elementary school with us because he was a part of the white flight. And then not the last incidents, but one of the other ones that was kind of a turning point for me was coming to the University of Florida. I think so many people were so fascinated by everything I was telling them. Like, I mentioned something casually about my upbringing. Wow, really? Wow, you knew people like this? And I was just like, why is this such a, like, don't you like know people? Like, I'm so confused by your fascination. I'm so confused. And then to backtrack, in middle school. So I went to a predominantly Jewish middle school, radically different from my predominantly Haitian elementary school. And that one was a doozy. I remember there were these pants that were really popular back then. and they were like sweatpants, but like sweat shorts, and they were brightly colored, and then the shirts would match. It was just whatever. But you could get them for cheap if you like went to the hood, right? And this Jewish boy gave this other kid money and was like, I'm scared to go to the hood. I'm not going to the hood. So buy these for me. and you knew what he was saying. And so the kid took the money and, was insulted and just took the money and didn't buy him the pants. But there's a lot of things. My mom at the time was in a relationship with a white guy. And I got into a conversation with one of my Jewish classmates saying, oh yeah, what's wrong? Because they were talking about not liking interracial relationships. And I was like, well, what's wrong with that? Like, my mom's dating a white guy. And the kid was like, I would kill your mother's boyfriend. And I was like, oh. And I had a crush on him. I was like, I don't have a crush on you anymore. So those were instances, and I feel like it can go on and on, but you get the drift. I've had some experiences that kind of jolted. So a lot of the experience actually happened within Miami. It was just different pockets, and I'm like, okay, we're all together, but we're not a melting pot. We're more like a salad. The different components are just kind of slapped on each other. They're not actually melding and meshing in this beautiful, unfortunately, they're not in this like beautiful stew. It's actually, we're near each other, but there's still a lot of like barriers and lines here.
So when these experiences happened, did you talk to your mom about these things, or was there someone you could kind of process these interactions or experiences?
Right. I think we processed it just amongst each other as peers, because it fell in line with, because right now race is such a huge conversation, but at the time it fell in line with other like ugly teenage banter, I think definitely when I was little, the kid who spit in my face, I think that was like, handled. But I think other things that were like said like that, as awful as they were, it wasn't at the forefront, we were talking about before social media and all of those things. So I think it was just kind of us as a group and as teenagers being like, well, that was said, or that, I don't even know if we said that person was racist. It was just kind of like, stay away from that person, or we know what they believe. Even like I had one kid, now this question is like, oh, there's been a lot of incidences. I had this one kid that was in school and he was actually dating a Jewish girl, but he like made this awful joke, and I'm not even gonna say it fully, but the difference between a Jewish person and a pizza, think about ovens, horrible joke, heinous joke, and he makes this joke like it's nothing. And I remember all of us, our mouths dropped when he said the full joke, which I won't say. And it was a predominantly black school, but we knew that he had ideas about black people too, but he also wasn't crazy. And so he said the joke about Jewish people because there wasn't as many, and his backlash wouldn't be as great. But he knew if he said anything about black students that it wouldn't be too good for him. So I think for that one, it was just shock. And then like, I just positioned him in my head, like who he is. So I think that's what happened. It was a lot of categorizing and just realizing that it's not over, and it's probably never, like racism is probably not going to be over anytime soon. So it was more of a peer group processing.
So you got to the University of Florida. Can you share a little bit more about your experience at the university?
Yeah, so I went to the University of Florida. I was an advertising major, something I wanted to do since I was 10 years old. And interestingly enough, it's because of representation. Representation matters so much. I know it's a hashtag and it's a cliche, but it matters. Exposure is everything. So Martin is a sitcom that was out in the 90s, and two ladies in the sitcom, Pam and Gina, they were advertising execs. And then Jamie Foxx show, that was a show with a black lead, and he left the hotel business to go work at Jingles 2000. So it was like a fictional advertising company. And I remember him and one of the ladies, they did a jingle off, and they were trying to sell white rice, and they did it to the tune of 3 Blind Mice. And like I was sold. I was like, advertising's for me. And then there was Full House. Jesse and Joey did advertising. So I knew I didn't change my major at all. I was just like, I've seen advertising. I love it. I want to do it. So I was an advertising major the whole time. And that was interesting because advertising is not a diverse industry. Though they are trying, it's not a diverse industry at all. So I had a generally good time. I was able to like all of my curiosities, and I enjoy culture. So I was able to experience, like go to, I never went to the Black Student Assembly, but I used to go to the South Asian and the Asian Assembly every year. And I enjoyed it like a great deal. There was like the Jewish kids on campus used to like dance. So I used to like join the dancing thing. So I did all of that stuff. So I had really, really diverse experience. For some reason, a lot of kids from my high school, North Miami Beach Senior High, actually got into UF. So I hung out with a lot of them, and my high school was super diverse. So our peer group for like my first year or two, it was an Indian girl, it was a Peruvian guy, it was a Haitian. So I had diverse experiences kind of because I brought them with me. Okay. But then there were definitely incidences. Like I remember a girl in one of my classes talking about affirmative action and how Black people are mostly at the University of Florida only, because of affirmative action. I remember those kind of instances. I remember like protests on campus because are they going to keep African American Studies, the program? Are they going to legitimize it into a whole major? I remember people not liking certain political cartoons. So that was definitely prevalent when I was there. And I remember I did African American Studies outside concentration, and you felt some comfort in there. But there were definitely instances where you felt othered at UF, and I think that's just hard because it's a PWI, predominantly white institution. So that definitely happened, and I definitely had moments that were jarring. When I had this one kid who I like acting, so I do accents, and he would ask me to he didn't say black scent, but he would ask me to do the black scent all the time, and I used to do it because it's something I like theater, but then finally I was like, I'm not your monkey. I'm not doing this. So then, he stopped asking me. But there were definitely things like that at UF for sure.
So after university, did you stay in Gainesville or?
I left like the day after graduation. I was done and I went back home to Miami for 2009 is when I graduated. And I stayed there till about 2012.
And what brought you back to Gainesville?
Teaching brought me back to Gainesville. I wanted to, so advertising was my major, and I worked loosely in the industry. So I worked for a record company based out of Philly, and I worked in a remote way. I did their marketing and advertising and all their online branding. So it was an urban faith-based record company. And the artist at the time, her name was Michelle Bonilla. She was getting a lot of headway. Like her music video was like on demand on Comcast. She did a show in Uganda, and it was like a Coca-Cola sponsored for like the Uganda division show. So like a lot of great things were happening with that. But then it's also an independent label. So it's just not sustainable for them to have like a lot of staff members. So I've been working with them for not much money for a really long time. And I was like, I love you guys, but like I need to start my next phase of my career, because it's not, even though she has a lot of great milestones, you're not able to afford me full time. And so I can't like be in limbo anymore. So I always knew that I was going to teach, always. But I thought that I was going to teach as a second career because advertising is a young person's game. Like you don't go into advertising at 30, Mm-hmm. It's like you work and then you're done. They want new talent. They need fresh ideas for products. So you're either going to be a senior level exec or you're out. So I thought I was going to just have fun in advertising for a few years. And then I was going to teach like when I was 40. I thought I was going to enter the teaching at 40. God was like, another plan, because I'd always worked with youth. So I came to do a post-bac program actually at Santa Fe called the EPI program, Educator Preparation Institute. And then I got certified alternatively through that program. And again, was trying to go back to Miami. Actually, I did go back to Miami. And I wanted to teach at my old high school because that's the population I wanted to serve. Mm-hmm. I wanted to serve Caribbean children. I wanted to serve kids that like would need someone like that. So I got hired at a Jewish school, the Hillel down there, Hillel of North Miami Beach, and I got hired to be a history teacher. But I also got hired here at Gainesville High School. And I was like so torn between that. Because I was like, that'd be such a cool experience to teach a Jewish population and see what that is. But they don't have standardized testing and things like that. And when you're first teaching, you need to kind of build that up. Like if you want to be marketable other places, you can't say I've never like prepared kids for this test or anything like that. So I just didn't think it was a good move. And then it was private, so I wouldn't be protected by like a union or something like that. So prayed about it. I asked people, honestly, like this was such a God thing. I met people who were connected to the other school who were just telling me some of the pros and cons. And then I was just like, Gainesville High School looks like the makeup a lot of my high school. So that's where I'm going to be. So I left again, came back, and that's how I came back here.
Speaking of teachers, were there any teachers in particular that were a big influence to you, or did you have any teachers that looked like you? Or
yeah, so again, one of those things where you see things and you think it's normal, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, this is not the norm. Because I've had students tell me that I'm the first Black teacher that they've ever had, and I'm like, whoa, right? So you're nodding, so you know. So I'm like, whoa. But North Miami Beach specific, and not even Miami, I had teachers that looked like me, like I just did. And I think that's such a great experience. So teachers that influenced me, there's so many. But Ms. Zeman, my fourth grade teacher, she was Jewish. I've mentioned Jewish people a lot because North Miami Beach, can't escape it. But I remember just like hidden messages that you don't know as a kid, but just that she would share her culture with us. Like we played dreidel in class, we made latkes, so and then I remember we read Number the Stars, which is about the Holocaust, but now that I think about it, I'm like, this was so higher order thinking. We didn't just read Number the Stars, we did like a book comparison. We read Number the Stars and Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. So one is about the Black experience, right? Like kind of a little bit after slavery, and one is about Holocaust. And we had to do some sort of picture like side by side. And I was like, geez, like this woman. So talk about cultural responsive teaching, which is like a buzzword right now. I mean, she had it in the 90s before it was a buzzword. So Ms. Zeman, yes, Ms. Zeman. Ms. Geltzer, another Jewish teacher in high school who I still talk to. And she also she let students be who they were and didn't demean them culturally. Like if it was their expression to speak a little louder or whatever, she didn't see that as bad behavior. She let them be who they were. So yeah, but I had teachers that looked like me all the time. And in my school, in high school, since we had a huge Haitian population, we had a Haitian assembly, like with their Flag Day. Just all that stuff just wasn't frowned upon. We had Latin music when we had like socials. And actually in elementary school, I don't know why I remember this, we actually had a program. The acronym was Haiti. It stood for Haitian American Interdisciplinary Teaching Initiative. Why do I know that? I don't know. And a lot of the program would meet in a portable, and we go in there, there'd be Haitian art. And I'm Jamaican, but like they catered to the population of our school, the majority. We would have guest speakers. I was on the Haitian dance team in elementary school. So I grew up, like, sometimes when I look at some of the challenges that are here in Alachua County as far as culturally responsive teaching, I'm so like taken aback because I've seen it done well. Not perfectly, but I've seen it done so well. And it's like the solution is not that hard. And I just don't. And I look at him like, yeah, it was really easy to put on that Haitian assembly. Like wasn't that hard at all. Like to just have a week in school dedicated to international students. I mean, it blows my mind. And I'm so grateful that I grew up in a place where it wasn't taboo, or it wasn't this thing where we had to have 1,000 school board meetings. It was just kids exist from everywhere. Let's honor their existence. The end. So I can say that I definitely grew up seeing teachers that look like me and everything.
What has your teaching experience been like so far?
Graced by God. And so I say that, and I see you over there nodding. I say that because there are so many things. Oh my gosh, that's a whole different podcast. There just needs to be a whole different thing about teaching. Like I gotta rein it in because then this will become something completely different. The public has no idea what teaching is. I had no idea what it is. It's been surprising. Some of the heavy loads, it really has, when I say grace by God, it's not just a cheap attribution for my faith. It's like, no, like the things that you have, the art of it in the moment, decisions that you have to make, that's beyond me. That's divine. And, you know, whatever anybody wants to say about that, but that's divine. It's been graced by God. There's certain situations that had it not been for God or the encouragement of my friends, like I would have been out in my second year. Like, absolutely. But it's been amazing to see the growth within me and for students that I've had. I'm in my sixth year of teaching. So this year makes like number 700, like the students that I've taught. Like, yeah.
Wow.
Because you get like 120 to 140 each year. So, I mean, I'm at 700 and some change right now. So, I mean, that impact is insane. JHS is wonderfully diverse. They actually are the flagship school for ESOL students. So ESOL students can go anywhere they want to, but we're the school that has like the comprehensive program. So I've taught students from Saudi Arabia. I've taught kids from Turkey. I've taught a lot of kids from Turkey actually. I've taught kids from Brazil, from Nigeria, from Burkina Faso. So I've taught kids from all over. And my first year teaching, it was like I had mostly Black students, and I'm not sure if that was by design or if it was just coincidence. But as the years went on, my population got more diverse, and I have an Egyptian student right now. So I just think that is so enriching, especially in the world that they live in and the rhetoric that they're hearing. It's so important, even if you're just sitting next to someone who has a different experience than you.
I know that you started a spoken word club.
Yeah, I did.
Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so my second year of teaching, I started Canes on the Mic Poetry Club, and it was called Spoken Word Club at first. Then I realized very quickly that it shouldn't be. It should just be poetry, because a lot of the kids, some kids were into it, but a lot of kids would just like to write. And so the conception is, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Freedom Writers, but it's a 90s movie. It's a true story. This teacher named Erin Grewell, she teaches in like a rough part in California, I think, not LA, one of those places. And it's rough, and the kids are like, they're gang members and they're struggling, and she helps them, and and none of them die, and yay, and she like rescued these street kids and made them good students. Great, noble story. That's not what's happening with Kids on the Mic. So many people think I'm just rescuing street kids, and it's just like the alternate narrative that's happening. It is a lot of students of color that are engaging in this art form, but the alternate narrative is that they actually are enjoying this because it's an outlet for them. These kids are brilliant writers, and they know poets I don't know. They're the ones that are like they're into poetry more than I've ever been. I wrote 5 new poems today. What are you talking about? Oh, do you know this poet? There's a famous poet coming to Gainesville. So her name's Olivia Gatwood. And the teenage kids are like, I'm trying to get tickets to that show, So this narrative that I'm rescuing these street kids with this art form is not true. These are kids that needed an outlet themselves, and it didn't exist. Because this art form, poetry clubs and all these things, it already exists all over the nation already. It's not new. It's just Gainesville. I mean, North Central Florida, it's just kind of slower to that kind of thing. So I think that is what people don't realize. So Canes on the Mic, it's kids writing original poetry from their heart. They are writing about some rough stuff. They are writing about trauma, but every population has trauma. And I think we need to emphasize that. It's not just because they're of color. It's open to everybody too, because we have a diverse group. And I thought it was just going to be kids writing every week and, writing about their relationships and going home. I didn't think they were going to be good either. I thought that I was going to have to bring them up to that, but they ended up being really good. And then I was like, oh wow, they're amazing. They just had nowhere to do this. So then it grew countywide. It started having kids from East Side coming, Pugh Hall's coming, how do they get there? Santa Fe. And it just grew exponentially. The kids have done the TEDxUF. They have traveled with me to Jacksonville as my co-presenters and to teachers. I went to this thing this summer. It's called the All Y'all Social Justice. Comes a conference for teachers, and like they have been my co-presenters, not just performing. They have presented information to professors. They did Story G&V conference. I mean, just amazing. And unfortunately, it's hit a hiatus right now. It's kind of a ceiling. We just don't have enough institutional support. So we've kind of slowed down and it's kind of stopped right now. I have 2 girls that want to keep it going. So they're juniors and seniors though. So I don't know what's going to happen after they leave because we just don't have enough institutional support, unfortunately. So we'll see what it looks like. But for 5 years, it has served well over 100 students.
Wow. Thank you for sharing.
Yes.
I guess backtracking a little bit, I know that you mentioned that your grandma practiced Buddhism, but you grew up in a Christian household.
Yes.
Can you share a little bit more about your faith background?
Yeah, for sure. So like I said, I've always grown up going to church. I didn't know any different except for my grandmother when she was practicing Buddhism. And then, of course, like I said about the Africanisms, I did see people in my family, like, I don't want to say spells because that's like, but like, you know, saw people in my family like being more like, not animist, but you know what I'm trying to say, like those kind of like a root spirituality. So I saw that as well, in addition to the Buddhism thing. So it's interesting. And I thank God that he's always given me clarity about what all that means in light of what I know from my faith. So I just grew up going to church and all those things. One of the earliest churches I remember one before, but like actual active memories, it was a white pastor married to a black woman. So, and it was, again, pretty diverse congregation. And that was one of my earliest memories. And I remember going there. I have notes from when I was like really younger, like with my Bible notes and all those things. So I think my mom, she raised me not just to go, but at night, like she would invest in books, like would be reading me like kid versions of the Bible. They don't have Trinity Broadcasting Network here, but I used to watch TBN, and on Saturday there were always like children cartoons and things like that. So like my faith was pretty rooted pretty early. It became my own faith, I would say, at 10, like where I was like, oh no, this is my faith. Like this is not just my mom's faith. So that was pretty cool because that solidified a lot of things. Then I went to middle school, and it was a predominantly Jewish middle school. And there's something in the Black community where it doesn't matter if you're not really following all the tenets or whatever exactly, but there's just an inherent cultural belief. Sometimes it's nominal Christianity, but it's just, no, you believe in God. Like, it's just, you don't know anyone really that doesn't believe in God. But then I went to middle school, and then it wasn't just Jewish. It was also, I think affluence had a part of it too. You start meeting people whose parents own yachts and condos and things. And like, there's a correlation sometimes. And socioeconomically and culturally, where for the first time I met students who decidedly were like, there is no God. What? And then of course there were Jewish students that did believe in God, but not necessarily Jesus. And of course, that as well. So that was the first, I was rocked in middle school. I was rocked. Like I knew there were atheists. I knew there were all these things, but just that someone could be so sure, I was distraught. I actually went through a period of like depression. I was like, what do I do with this? These are my friends. And I was really struggling. I remember telling that to my mom, and she was just really supportive. Like I was like, I'm having serious doubts. And she was, I think surprisingly, I thought she would be like worried or whatever, but she was really, really supportive. And I remember just like pushing through, like praying, consulting, like, because there's also teen programs, watching those teen programs, and I actually had a Bible that had like a teen Bible that had questions. And I just, email was, it's going to make me sound so old. Oh my gosh. But email was getting popular. That's the truth. I was on America Online, okay? And there were websites that were dedicated to teen. There was Passageway, like dedicated to teen questions. So like I just dug and delved and was honest with my friends. And there was a lot of music. Like music has always been like Christian rap, Christian hip hop, Christian reggae. Like, so they were all answering the questions for me in a context that I needed. And I remember literally just through those resources and seeking God, I remember just feeling like God's not scared of your questions. And then slowly but surely being able to read the Bible again and see it with new eyes, or to know I could trust God with my questions. And I remember, because I'm a complete weirdo, I went to school when I started to regain the faith again, and I had these jeans that for some reason colored pencil like showed on them. And I remember, I really believe God put this in my spirit, that evidence is the product of truth. And like I decorated my pants and like wore that all over them, because I'm a weirdo. But that was really important to me, just that nugget that he gave me, that God gave me, because it was just like a lot of people were like, well, I'm not going to believe anything is true. I'm not going to believe anything is true until I see the truth. And it's like, well, evidence is the product of truth. So once you embrace truth, if it is indeed true, then evidence will follow. And once I started following that, and I can't believe I remember that, but ever since I started following that, like, no, let's pursue what I've called truth. And then if it is true, evidence will show itself. And that's what's happened. So my faith was solidified in middle school when I was like, everything I've ever known, I don't know. And then practicing that has helped me tremendously to embrace other pitfalls and other doubts and things of that nature.
Moving forward, I guess, when
Yes.
you came to university, did you find a church home?
Yeah. So my church in Miami actually has a branch here. So I came here, I was like, oh, I'm going to go to that church and it's going to be great. It was completely different than what I thought. And I'm like, okay, either I've grown or it's just different. So I wasn't there for very long. It was just not going to serve my needs and what I've come to know about my faith. So I went to another church that was a good balance, because it was popular, but not popular in a celebrity sense. So they had a good population, but it wasn't like the go-to popular church at the time. There's one I'm not going to mention, but there is a popular church that like college students go to. Like, that's the church, like that's the poppin' church. And I tried the poppin' church and I was like, it's not poppin' for me. But I went to another church that was a happy medium. They had the strobe lights and everything, but not a stadium full. So I was like, okay, it's in the middle. And that worked for me. Like, I loved it, but I came to UF at 2005. I did not find that church until 2008. Like, there was a lot of, you call a church a stinker? Yes, there was a lot of stinkers before that, but I found that. But then I was graduating, like in 2009. So I was just like, I wasn't there very long. So I went back on Miami, as you know, came back, and I'm like, going back to the church. I don't know what happened, but they just started endorsing some stuff that was just pretty wonky. And I was just like, dang it. I thought that I was going to be good. So then I was just looking, and there was a church. So in Miami, I worked at a homeless shelter in their like community relations department. So there was a couple that came and served the homeless all the time. I was the volunteer coordinator. So I put on Facebook that I'm looking for a church, because I was just tired of like gimmicky church. I was like, I just want a church. Like, it doesn't have to be popular. There doesn't have to be any strobe lights. Like, I just need to go to church. And this particular person says, well, I have a friend who lives in Gainesville who goes to this particular church. And I was like, okay. One of my tests for churches, because of experiences that I've had, is that if I don't have a car, somebody should be there to give me a ride, right? You're serving people, right? So if you're like, oh, I'm sorry, I just can't, it's too hard, I don't go to that church. You're not about serving people. If you can't give me a ride. So I called the office and I was just like, hey, I would like to visit. I don't have a ride. And immediately, like, they actually had a rotation. Like, there was a couple that would take me when the other lady couldn't, and they had no problem taking me. And I was just like, this may be it, right? And then one time they took me to a Sunday school, and they were doing a book study. We were studying Growing Your Faith by Jerry Bridges. And it's just, I still have that book. It was a really in-depth book. And I was like, oh, wow, they're really about studying. It's not just something that's feel good. It's really like delving into the roots of what this faith is. So I was like, I'm sold. And I've been going to that particular church ever since.
I'm glad you found a church.
Yes.
And it's really cool that they were able to find you rides and serve you that way. That is a good test.
Yes. Yes.
So from your experiences in churches of different kinds,
Yes.
can you just share, as a person of color, how your experience may have changed?
Oh yeah. So again, Miami, man. In Miami, you're going to dance to Latin music at church. You're gonna, in the same service, you're going to have a Creole song, and in that same service, someone's gonna do hip hop worship. And it's, I mean, my last pastor, my last Miami pastor. I mean, I'm not gonna take you through the whole history, but you can imagine. Like I'm used to like black choirs and all these things. But my last church in Miami, my pastor was so half Lebanese, I believe. No, yes, no, that's not right. Half Armenian and Liberian, I think. So, and his wife was Black Panamanian. So, like their kids were Hispanic and African and Middle Eastern. Like it was just already there was, if that was their thinking coming in. So, and I remember we had like that service where everything was played, and I remember he said, hey, if we had somebody from, Appalachia, we'll play some mountain music. Like it was just, that's what we did. And it was really cool because it was intergenerational and it was all races. So you saw this lady named like Miss Ruth. Miss Ruth was an elderly white woman, and she actually was at that location before that church had taken it over. So Miss Ruth is enjoying her hymns because we had the hymns still. She's enjoying Hillsong. And then she's just kind of standing and people are rapping and there Miss Ruth is, she's there. And so my experience changed. The church that I'm in now, it's hard because I feel so called there. Like I've considered like if that's the best place for me, and times when I've considered it, God's like, no, this is where I have you. And I'm like, okay. It is a majority white church. And the people of color, you count on one or two hands. And it's interesting because, well, talking about worship and music, like that's just the difference, And I think it's hard for people to understand like what a welcoming factor music can be. It's not just, oh, you're belly aching over, not having your favorite song. And it's like, it's so much bigger than that. We talk about worship in the kingdom and what it's going to be. It's going to be a chorus of us and angels, singing before the Lord, every tribe, nation, and tongue. Like, then what does that look like, right? On a Sunday, like if you truly believe that every form of worship is important, then why is it not, this is not a marketing firm. And I'm not talking about my church particularly, but just this separation that we have in America between white and black, we are still acting. And again, is a backdrop of course, racism and stuff, but it's also a backdrop of like America and the capitalistic corporate kind of entity. We still do approach church, even the church with some of the most purest hearts. We do approach it like a corporation. Who's our target market? What are we like? We're serving. Like, how can we serve the needs and make people comfortable? And it's not about comfort. It's about stretching for sanctification. So it's so much bigger than a song. And I think that is one of the hardest things, because how you worship from your heart. Like, I don't expect everybody to be dancing and doing all, because that's not a fair expectation either. But how comfortable does someone feel who is used to jumping? Can they shout? Are they too loud? Which I've heard that happen at my church, and the particular person I've heard that said about actually left the church, and they're not in Florida anymore, but it affected their faith tremendously. And their faith is not where it used to be, just to put it lightly. And it's just, if somebody, I've literally seen at my church, and I'm not just saying this, I love my church. I wouldn't, and this is not me just saying it to smooth it over, I wouldn't be there if I didn't receive love. I wouldn't be there if there wasn't care. And people have had hard conversations with me. Like, people are willing to, for the most part, like I've had people willing to talk about this race thing and how it feels to be othered. So there's love there. And I really think one of the reasons, before I say what I'm going to say, I really think that the reason why I'm there is because the opposite could happen, right? I could hear so much about what's going on in the world and just be bitter and angry. I could see myself getting in a place where it's just like, well, I don't fully have love for my white brothers and sisters because of all this horrible stuff. Being at the church I'm at forces me to still, just like I need to be humanized and any other person of color needs to be humanized, I need to also humanize my white brothers and sisters. So I really feel like that's a huge part of why God has me at that church. But going back to worship, what I have seen, I've seen people like go like this, like they want to like worship and lift their hands, but they don't know if it's okay. And I don't think anybody in my church is opposed. I mean, people do lift their hands, but I don't think anyone's opposed to certain expressions, but you don't know, because when you go there, the environment, like it has to be reinforced. It has to be said, you know. One of the things that happen in Black churches that I don't see happening at my church, and I think it is just a difference, but I think it's a subtle thing. Like I can't sing, so I can't judge anyone's worship style. And our worship leaders, you can tell from their faces and their hearts that they are worshiping. They're not just performing up there, like they are worshiping, you know. So I'm not critiquing that. I don't want that to be misconstrued. But one thing that happened in Black churches is like people are given permission. Everybody, come on, lift your hands. Shout out to the Lord. Like just how worship is led is different culturally, and that has a radically different effect. So worship is huge in that sense. I also think that being in a majority white church, there are issues that they're willing to speak about. Like they're getting much better now at speaking about. I think the Lord really like convicted them and was like, you guys have to talk about this. It's a responsibility. But, you know, people get upset with hard conversations. And I've seen that. I've seen people get upset. I've seen people make the choice to no longer worship in the congregation. And as a person of color, what does that say? They're mentioning something that is happening, you know, if you're a Christian, you know that racism is not just a social issue, it's a sin against the Lord. So you leave, what does that say? Like the Bible says, mourn with those who mourn, rejoice with those who rejoice. You have shown that you can mourn against sex trafficking. You know, like no one is afraid to talk about that. You can mourn when there's another natural disaster, but you can't mourn when your brother and sister says, I am suffocating in this environment. And I need this to be a reprieve. You know, the gospel of reconciliation. What does your theology say about reconciliation and what that looks like? There's neither Greek nor Jew, slave nor free, if you cannot like address this elephant in the room. And I think that's the biggest thing that I struggle with, is knowing that there are people who sit next to me who don't see me as the image of God like they should.
So as you continue to attend, if you had the opportunity to address individuals in your congregation, people that are followers of Jesus, who are also white, what are some things that you would like to share? Or
I would say listen, be open. There was one time when I was at an event and I was doing a presentation, and this woman very innocently said in her prayer, Lord, help us learn how to love the other. And I was like, guys, I have one more thing to say. So just know that and I say it like that because I'm like high pitched and I'm like, I'm gonna like critique the prayer. But I was like, so at one point, you guys were other to me. So I was just trying to explain no, that's othering me. You can't, because it sounds so foreign and so alien, Lord, help us to pray for those who are different than what we've grown up around. Help us to love those, you know what I mean? Not the other, because then that's me. What are you doing? And again, very innocently. But it doesn't mean that I don't feel it just because I know it came from an innocent place. You're still centering whiteness. So I would say that ask questions. I would say prayerfully ask the Holy Spirit to reveal, where does prejudice lie in your own heart? I know prejudice lies in my heart. You know what I mean? It does. I grew up from a background that's not affluent. I can easily see people who are affluent and just assume that things are phenomenal. I recognize that prejudice. It doesn't pain me to do so, like recognize that. So ask the Holy Spirit to like see where that is. And I would also say, just humanize the people that are of color in your church. I know I love talking about this and teaching people, but I don't want every encounter to be teaching me about race. And boy, have I had that. And oh my gosh, I am a teacher by profession, so I don't want to do it off the clock too. So there's a way to have a conversation without begging me to teach you every time. Just part of how you learn about me, like you learn about every other human, is just by doing life with them. You'll know I have a friend, Ziao is one of my closest friends, and I didn't ask Ziao, how are you Chinese? What is it like to be Chinese? I hung out with Ziao for years. I learned about dim sum, not the Chinese breakfast, not because she wrote me a dissertation. It's because we ate dim sum. Like, that's how I learned about it, because we broke bread in that way together. I went to her house and I saw how her mother made certain things. So doing life is how you learn. It's not just always probing. So it's a fine line, and you have to toe it. You have to toe it. I mean, you grew up, every country has a context of things that are wrong, like specifically, like you grew up in a country that has this ugly history. It's interesting because my church was actually founded in 1968, the year that Martin Luther King was assassinated. And we had an anniversary recently, and I was hoping, I mentioned it, nothing happened, but I was still hoping that somebody said, wow, not only did all these great things happen, our church was born in this turmoil that was going on. Here's how we addressed it then. Because I heard that they actually did address it really well then. Of course, I wasn't around. But look, all these years later, we find ourselves in the same place. What are we to do? It's no coincidence that God would have this particular anniversary kind of fall in this time that we're in. And I really feel like that we lost that. I feel like that would have been a perfect opportunity to make that correlation. I mean, for your church to be created when Martin Luther King was assassinated. So those are all the things I would say. Like, just make sure that you are willing to have the conversations. I will say that I've had conversations where at the end of it, I've had, especially older people, say, wow, I didn't think about that. Or I guess I was raised in this way, so I did believe this, I had this one lady, she's no longer with us. I actually have her picture on the shelf over there, and I love her so much because I come to church very black, okay? Like, my hair, like, big and chunky sometimes. My phone, I don't have it here. Like, it has all, like, a 1969 ad for black ladies. I have a bag with this lady with natural hair. Like, I come to church, I'm very black. This thing right here, this hoodie, I mean, it comes from an urban, like, Christian company. It comes with, like, pants. And it's who I am, but it's also a little intentional. Yes, I'm gonna wear those huge wooden earrings. I sure am. And there was this one lady who said to me, and like I said, she passed away, man, you're just the epitome of a black woman. Like, the way you dress. I was like, yes, let's have this conversation. And she was like in her 70s. And that was just so beautiful that she would feel comfortable to say that. I have a card on the shelf. There was an elderly lady that let me live with her, actually. Didn't know me from Adam. And I thought that was so sweet. And the card that's on the shelf, it's actually a woman, like, it's like a woodcut of an afro. And she's like, this is you. This is for you. And it's exactly the style that I would love. But she learned my style because I stayed with her for a month. So I've had really positive experiences racially as well. They have a picnic that they do in the neighborhood, and I suggested a song, which was because the neighborhood is mostly like black neighborhood, and I suggested a song to be played, and I was having a conversation with somebody, and the song played, and I did not know I was going to react this way. I bawled. No one was paying attention to the song. It was just a recording where people were eating. Nobody cared. But I heard it, and I was like, ah. And I walked into the director at the time, like, thank you for playing this song. And I think it's because I felt seen. So those are like some of my experiences. Because there's been good ones. There's definitely been good ones. But, we still got a lot to work out.
Marilyn?
Yes.
would you like to ask any questions?
No, I've just been listening.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I was trying to be quiet.
No, you're great. Is there anything else you'd like to share? Any believer, non-believer, church leadership,
Right.
anything you'd like to share that could help kind of Big C church or white majority churches take steps forward?
Yeah, I think the fear of people leaving is, because again, honest, practical things. You have to pay the light bill. I get it. Majority of people leave. You can't pay the light bill. Church is done. I get it. But I also think that if you do it the way God is leading you to, and it's not just reactionary, like something happened in the news, so do it. I think if it's really coming from a genuine place out of your heart, some people may leave, but that's not necessarily, it could be heartbreaking. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a pruning. Like, do you want people who are not ready to have these conversations? Do you really want them, around, at this time? And I think if you really trust God and have a faith, that He will send those who need to be there. And I think talking about non-believers, that this is something, there's a lot of people that are jaded or who've left the church. And I think this type of reconciliation is what could possibly set the church apart from what's going on right now. Right now, it's just rhetoric, back and forth, back and forth. But what would it look like to say, I love you anyhow, but not in just a passive way? I love you anyhow. What does repentance actually look like from a corporate body? What does repentance mean? It was asking for forgiveness means. We kind of know what it looks like on an individual level. What does it look like when, just like Israel had to do sometime as a nation, when an American church says, Lord, we have sinned. Let's reconcile this. Let's make this better. One last thing, in terms of reconciliation, I actually had somebody at my church say something that was really, really not cool through Facebook. I didn't even know this person. I was giving a positive comment on someone else's post, and this person it was a firestorm. And there was actually a non-believer that was on the thread that was really like, oh, look at you acting like a believer, and really and I was like, this is so bad. And I was nervous. I was like, I don't know this man's motives. I was just like, I don't know. And I was analyzing all these. I was like, sometimes his facial expressions, I don't know if I was like, is he crazy? I don't know. What's going to happen? I was just I didn't feel comfortable at all. And I blocked him on Facebook because I was like, I don't know what this is going to look like. And I told my pastor that it happened, but I didn't tell them who it was because I was like, the way the world is looking right now, no ma'am. And then he, months later, so I don't know what happened, months later, nervously came up to me and was like, I'm so sorry. And, sometimes I'm not sensitive. I don't think about what I say, whatever. And I was like, I said, we're reconciled in Christ, brother. He's like, oh, I'm so glad. And we hugged, So it's gonna take, the last thing I'll say, it's gonna be messy. How Jesus died for us wasn't nice and neat in a box. We read about the blood, we read about bones being broken, but let's think about what that really looks like, virgin birth. He had to be born. There was placenta. It was messy. It was real. So this has existed for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. It's not going to be cleaned up in 10, 20, and 30. If you give a baby or a toddler, have at it. Here's powder. Here's honey. Here's whatever. Do whatever you want with the room. You give them 2 hours to do that. It's not going to take 10 minutes to clean up. It's going to take maybe 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe 2 days. So embrace the mess. It's going to be messy. And it's not the first thing that's ever been messy in the world. So it's going to be messy. Embrace the mess so it can become something beautiful at the end.
I have one more question.
Yes.
You had mentioned briefly earlier the importance of representation.
Yes.
Can you speak a little bit more into that?
Yes. I'm sorry, that was so loud. I was like, there's so many ways this can go. Particularly in church context. We read, where I go to church, I would say it's a very intellectual church, darling. And we read a lot of books, and we hear from a lot of intellectuals, and we say their names off like this, and we assume everyone just knows who they are, because we're all white and reformed and intellectual. And of course, we just have that reference. We have all their books in our shelves. So I would say, knowing that there's other voices out there and listening to them and getting their books. You know, there is Jackie Hill Perry released Gay Girl, Good God, and it is an amazing read. Jackie Hill Perry is blackity black. I think she wears shirts that say things like that. She is dreadlocked. She is hip hop. She is a hip hop artist, and she is theologically sound in the best way. And she's a woman. She's a woman of color. She has experiences with the LGBT community, and she wrote this amazing freaking book. And I suggested it, and I do know that leadership has read it. Some leadership has read it, and I'm like, this needs to be Sunday school. What are we doing? So that would be nice to be, because I think that's just across the board, not just my church. Like the great ones that we read, like I remember being like, I guess there's no black apologists. I guess there's no Asian apologist. Like actually there is one. Sushan Ra. That's his name, Sushan Ra. Is he Korean? I'm not sure, but he is amazing. He's amazing. Like when we have these conferences or people are being brought to speak, hello, you know, I'm happy we had Ravi Zacharias here the other day, you know, but like, who are you saying are intellectual minds? Why aren't we reading books? Oh, I don't know anyone who has a book that Google. If you really wanted to try, you would. So that's what I think when we're studying and we're looking at commentaries, and why aren't we looking at more? Why aren't we receiving more from people of color? Why not? So I think when it comes to studies, that's super important.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Yay.